What if someone has been watching over you your entire life? Not in a way that announces itself, not with wings breaking open the sky or a voice descending from the clouds, but quietly, patiently, almost invisibly. A presence so close that you confuse it with luck, intuition, timing, or the strange feeling that something stopped you just before the wrong step. A person walking alone at night understands this mystery instinctively. There are moments when the world feels ordinary, and then suddenly not ordinary at all. A pause that saves you, a turn you cannot explain, a hesitation that changes everything. Most people dismiss these moments because mystery feels harder to live with than explanation. But what if the most important forms of protection never arrive dramatically? What if they arrive so gently that you spend your whole life calling them coincidence? Many cultures believe every person has a guardian. The language changes from one tradition to another. Sometimes it is an angel, sometimes a spirit, sometimes an ancestor, sometimes a presence sent by God or woven into destiny, or simply known by the heart before it is named by religion. What matters is not only the doctrine, but the persistence of the idea itself. Across history, across distance, across radically different civilizations, human beings kept returning to the same intuition. No one moves through life entirely alone. Heaven stands in light because she represents that ancient hope, that care may exist beyond what the eye can confirm, and that love may sometimes act through unseen companionship rather than direct intervention. The idea survives because it speaks to a longing deeper than proof. The longing to believe that vulnerability is not the same as abandonment. Moments of impossible luck are where many people first begin to wonder. A child falls from a height that should have broken more than fear and somehow survives. A stranger appears at exactly the right time. A delayed train, a missed call, a wrong turn, a forgotten object, and later, only later, does the person realize how much disaster may have been hiding behind that small interruption. Of course, the rational mind can explain almost anything if it tries hard enough. Statistics, probability, survival bias, memory selecting what feels meaningful. But explanation does not always erase wonder. Some moments carry a texture that feels different, not magical in an obvious sense, just unnervingly precise, as if reality made the smallest possible adjustment in order to protect a life without ever revealing the hand that moved it. Near accidents live in the same territory. The car that stops a second too soon, the step not taken, the sudden instinct to look left instead of right, the feeling that something told you not to go, not to enter, not to trust, not to move forward just yet. People call it gut feeling, instinct, timing, chance, and maybe sometimes that is all it is. But nearly every person has at least one story they tell in a quieter tone than usual. A story where disaster came close enough to leave a mark, and yet somehow passed by. These moments do not prove anything, but they stay. They linger in memory because they feel like edges, places where life almost split in two, but didn't. And on those edges, mystery becomes easier to sense than certainty. Strange coincidences are perhaps the most difficult to classify. You think of someone and they call. You take a wrong road and meet the person you needed to meet. You arrive late and avoid a catastrophe you never see. You hear a sentence at exactly the moment your heart is breaking, and somehow it feels less like information and more like response. Heaven stands partly in shadow here, because mystery rarely arrives in full brightness. It comes half hidden, half revealed, close enough to stir the soul, but distant enough to leave doubt intact. That is what makes these moments powerful. They do not force belief, they invite it. They leave room for interpretation, which may be exactly how genuine spiritual protection would have to work in a world where freedom still matters. Or are they simply chance? Hell watches from the edge of the scene because every mystery has a skeptic inside it. Human beings are pattern-making creatures. We connect dots, we tell stories, we turn randomness into signs because signs are easier to love than indifference. Maybe the missed disaster means nothing. Maybe the survival was unlikely, but not supernatural. Maybe the timing was coincidence, and nothing more. Hell's presence matters because doubt is not always cynicism. Sometimes doubt protects us from desperation, from seeing messages in every shadow, from turning uncertainty into fantasy because fantasy feels comforting. The colder interpretation is always available, that the universe is silent, accidents are statistical, and human beings keep writing invisible guardians into reality because the alternative feels unbearably lonely. What if someone guides us quietly? Not by taking away freedom, not by arranging every event like a puppet master, but by nudging, warning, delaying, protecting the smallest openings through which destiny keeps moving. A person looking into the sky does not always want certainty. Sometimes they want the gentler possibility that they have not been abandoned to randomness completely. Guidance, if it exists, may be almost silent by necessity, too obvious, and freedom disappears. Too forceful, and trust becomes compulsion. So perhaps true guidance would feel less like command and more like presence, a softness at the edge of danger, an intuition before the fall, a strange peace before the next step. Something that does not replace human choice, but walks beside it, not controlling our lives. That distinction matters. The idea of a guardian becomes frightening if it turns into surveillance without love or control without consent. But the older spiritual image is often gentler than that. Protection does not mean domination. It does not mean preventing every pain, removing every mistake, or forcing every life toward safety. If such a presence exists, perhaps its work is smaller and more merciful, not making us invulnerable, but preserving us through moments that might have closed too soon, not choosing for us, but keeping us alive long enough to keep choosing. Light fills the frame here because true protection would not feel like possession. It would feel like space, space to continue, space to change, space to become who we still have time to become, but protecting us when we cannot see. Heaven speaks most clearly here. There are moments in life when human awareness is simply not enough. We are distracted, young, exhausted, grieving, proud, afraid. We do not see the edge we are walking toward, or the kindness that is trying to reach us. If something like a guardian angel exists, perhaps its deepest work happens precisely there, in the blind places, in the moments when perception fails, but care does not. That kind of protection would rarely be provable, which is why it remains mysterious. Yet its emotional logic is powerful. Love does not only appear where it can be confirmed. Sometimes love is most real where it remains hidden in order to protect without overpowering. And hidden care, by its very nature, often looks exactly like luck until much later. What if you already met them? That possibility changes the entire feeling of the question, because then the guardian is no longer an abstract doctrine or distant myth. It becomes personal. Maybe it was the stranger who said exactly the right thing and vanished. The person you never saw again. The face in a crowd that felt strangely calm. The hand that helped once and disappeared into ordinary life before you realized how much had changed. A person standing at the edge of a cliff understands this instinctively. Life contains moments so sharp that later memory cannot touch them without trembling. And sometimes, looking back, we sense that someone was there in a way the world never fully explained. Not dramatically, just enough to turn disaster away and leave mystery in its place. And never realized it. That is what makes the idea so beautiful and so sad at the same time. If guardians are real, perhaps they are not recognized, because recognition would change the nature of the relationship. Mystery would become certainty. Faith would become proof. So maybe the most sacred forms of closeness remain half hidden on purpose. A person turning around into empty space becomes the perfect image, because much of human life feels like that. We sense presence, then lose it. We feel protected, then doubt it. We remember a moment, then spend years trying to decide whether it meant anything at all. The not knowing is part of the experience. It leaves the heart open, unsettled, and strangely comforted. Some mysteries do not need to be solved in order to be real. Sometimes the greatest mysteries are the ones closest to us. Heaven disappears into light because that is how certain forms of care may always remain, near enough to save, hidden enough to preserve wonder. Maybe guardian angels are not meant to be proven. Maybe they are meant to be sensed in the fragile spaces between danger and deliverance, fear and peace, loneliness and the sudden feeling that loneliness is not the whole story. Or maybe all of this is simply the human heart trying to find tenderness in a dangerous world. But even that possibility reveals something true. People long to believe that care can exist beyond what is visible. And perhaps that longing itself is not weakness. Perhaps it is memory. Perhaps in some quiet and impossible way, the soul recognizes protection long before the mind learns how to explain it. See you in the next video, where the questions only get darker.